The wind drifts over Rome like an ancient whisper, weaving through palaces and shadows until it reaches a mansion where joy has been forbidden and Christmas erased like a crime. Inside, Isabella Conti lives surrounded by silence, a woman who turned love into a sentence and solitude into her only refuge. On a cold night of snow and fading memories, a stranger crosses her gates, an art restorer. A former priest, carrying with him a quiet calm she cannot understand. He comes to repair a broken angel, yet he will end up restoring something far more fragile, her heart. Between confessions and secrets, guilt and longing, Isabella will learn that love, even when forbidden, always finds a way through the ruins. The Conti mansion stands like a fortress forgotten by time. Inside, the air is thick, heavy with echoes that no longer belong to anyone. Old portraits stare from the walls, keeping secrets that even the dust refuses to bury. Every step Isabella takes sends the sharp rhythm of her heels echoing through the corridors, the sound of a kingdom built on fear and control. She is the woman who erased Christmas, and everyone knows that within those walls, December has no warmth, only iron and ashes. Her power is a kind of loneliness that learned to walk in high heels. No smile dares to meet her gaze, and even the servants speak softly, afraid of waking the ghosts that live in the silence. She walks the grand hallway with the calm authority of someone who commands armies. Yet her eyes betray something cracked beneath the surface, an emptiness no amount of gold can hide. The mansion is beautiful, but it breathes guilt. Every unlit lamp, a reminder that love and pain have always lived side by side there. Outside, Rome glows with Christmas lights. Children sing in the squares, laughter spills into the cold night, and church bells chime faintly beneath the falling snow. Inside, however, only shadows remain. Isabella stands by the window, watching the reflections of those distant lights tremble across the glass, and remembers the night she lost everything. It was Christmas Eve, the night when the sound of an explosion replaced her sister Sophia's laughter. Since then, she vowed that Christmas would never cross her doorstep again. No trees, no candles, no songs, she said the next morning, her voice carrying the weight of someone burying their own heart. And she kept her word. No symbol of Christmas has entered the mansion since. The date that once brought families together became her greatest enemy. She chose silence over memory, steel over hope, and the world, as if obeying her grief, never dared to ask her to smile again. But some silences refuse to stay quiet. At night, when the house sleeps and the wind claws at the windows, Isabella hears the sounds she tries to forget, the crackle of the fire, Sophia's laughter, the last "I'll be right back" before everything collapsed. Her heart, that traitor, keeps remembering what her mind fights to erase. There is pain no power can conquer, only the slow endurance of absence. Everyone in the house knows that December is forbidden territory. When the snow begins to fall, they exchange uneasy glances. When the radio hums a Christmas song, they turn the dial in silence. Everything must remain untouched in the dark, out of fear or perhaps reverence. And in her office, Isabella signs papers with the same cold precision as always, sealing envelopes as if she were sealing her own heart. Yet somewhere deep within her, something still stirs. The clock ticks on the desk, steady and merciless, marking the time she no longer allows herself to feel. In the basement, the vault holds more than money and inheritance. It guards an envelope sealed with her sister's handwriting. Isabella has never opened it. She tells herself it's because she doesn't need to, but deep down she knows it's because she couldn't bear to. The fear of understanding what Sophia wanted to say is greater than the desire to know. Sometimes she runs her fingers over the envelope, and the gesture feels almost like a prayer cut short. Out on the balcony, the cold wind brushes her face, a reminder that time doesn't stop, not even for those who chose to stop feeling. Rome glows below, indifferent, eternal. Isabella watches in silence. and for a moment, her breath falters. For a moment, she feels the ache of something she can't quite name. Power, vast as it is, can't warm the emptiness she has allowed to grow inside. From somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of a choir drifts through the night. Isabella closes her eyes and the melody cuts through her like a soft blade. She remembers the scent of pine, Sophia's hands decorating the tree, their laughter mingling with the smell of mulled wine. She opens her eyes quickly, as if refusing to dream. "It's over," she whispers to herself. But her voice trembles. The mansion seems to respond. A creak in the wood, a sigh behind the walls. Sometimes she swears Sophia still walks there, not as a ghost, but as a stubborn memory that refuses to fade. Grief is a guest that never leaves. Isabella has learned to live with it, offering silence as its daily meal. Still, there are nights when the emptiness makes noise. In the hallway mirror, she sees the reflection of a woman powerful and broken, a queen of an empire that could not protect her from pain. And no matter how much she tries to convince the world that Christmas is dead, something always betrays her. Maybe it's in her eyes, or maybe in the heartbeat she keeps pretending not to hear. Some deaths don't last forever, the house seems to whisper, but she pretends not to listen. In the library, the fireplaces are cold. Isabella runs her hand over the books, feeling the dust as if it were memories clinging to her skin. Each title is a distraction from reality, each page a small escape. When the wind forces a window open, she shuts it hard, as if trying to keep life itself from entering. But life always finds a way through the cracks. Love and redemption, two words she hasn't spoken in years. Redemption requires remorse, and love, surrender. Isabella no longer believes in either. To her, love is weakness, disguised as virtue. Yet in her eyes there's something that betrays that belief. Deep down, she only wants someone unafraid of what she's become. The garden lies buried under snow. No ornaments, no color, only the endless white of a winter that refuses to end. From the window, Isabella watches and, for an instant, sees a shadow moving between the trees. She blinks, and it's gone. Maybe it was just a memory trying to take form. Or maybe something is about to happen. She sits in the red velvet armchair that once belonged to her sister's favorite corner. Her fingers trace the fabric, feeling the weight of time pressing down. The clock ticks relentlessly, indifferent to what was lost. Isabella closes her eyes and, for a brief second, she seems ready to ask for forgiveness, but pride silences her. Pride has always been her only armor. The rain begins to fall, thin, steady, and patient. Each drop sounds like the echo of a distant heartbeat. Isabella rises and turns off the remaining lights one by one, until only the dimness remains. In the dark, everything feels more honest. In the dark, even the strong admit what they hide. Without realizing it, she whispers her sister's name. The entire house seems to hold its breath. The sound of the rain blends with echoes of the past, and Christmas, the one she tried so hard to erase, seems to whisper through the corridors. Isabella stands still, but something within her begins to stir, something small and dangerous, like a spark under ashes. Destiny, quiet and deliberate, starts to draw near. Because no pain stays motionless forever. No heart, no matter how cold, stops seeking warmth. Isabella Conti, the woman who erased Christmas, doesn't know it yet. But the coming night will bring more than memories. It will bring a gaze, a presence, and perhaps a new form of faith. And the mansion, for the first time in years, seems to breathe deeply, as if waiting for someone. Rome lies suspended between faith and frost. December's lights flicker on old balconies, glimmering over cobblestone streets blanketed in snow. The distant voices of choirs fill the air like a forgotten perfume. And the wind carries an ancient whisper, the whisper of time, insisting on beginning again. The city wears Christmas like a beautiful memory, while from atop the hill, the Conti mansion watches in silence, rejecting the miracle and embracing the void. From her window, Isabella stands motionless, wrapped in a dark robe. The cold glass mirrors a face that no longer recognizes hope. Outside, the laughter of children echoes like a language she's forgotten. Inside, the past keeps speaking in murmurs. The distant sound of bells mingles with the memory of that last Christmas, the one when snow turned red and the scent of pine mixed with smoke. Since that night, Isabella turned December into forbidden ground and the house into a mausoleum of broken promises. She thinks of Sophia the way one faces a wound that refuses to heal. With every breath of wind, flashes return, the explosion, the scream, the guilt etched into her like ink under skin. No symbols, no memories. Here Christmas is dead. Those were her words, firm and final, and she kept them. No candle lit, no angel hung, no hymn sung. Mourning became law, and law became armor. Yet even the coldest steel cracks when destiny decides to touch it. Meanwhile, across the streets of Rome, another path unfolds. A man walks alone beneath the same snowy sky, carrying a worn leather case and a calm gaze. Adrian Leone, art restorer, former priest, and a man fluent in the language of silence. His hands, marked by paint and old faith, now seek to redeem forgotten walls instead of souls. He walks through narrow alleys as one who still believes some ruins are worth saving. That night, Adrian was called to restore a fresco in an abandoned chapel. The invitation had come from an unnamed foundation, discreet, faceless, mysterious, with nothing but an address. Conti Estate. The name felt heavy, strange, like something the wind whispers as a warning. Still, he accepted. Destiny, when it decides to act, often disguises itself as coincidence. The black car arrived shortly after 10. The driver, silent and impersonal, asked no questions. The higher they drove into the hills, the emptier the streets became. Rome faded behind them, swallowed by the night. And the silence inside the car felt like the prelude to something irreversible. When the iron gates creaked open, the sound of chains echoed like an omen. The Conti mansion stood before him like a profane cathedral, grand, distant, and wrapped in the cold breath of winter. Its facade demanded both reverence and fear, a beauty that dared you to look closer. Adrian stepped out of the car, his heavy coat drawn against the chill, his expression calm, though something inside him stirred, a feeling he couldn't name. Each step he took across the marble courtyard echoed between the pillars, as if the house itself were listening. One of the guards led him down a narrow corridor toward the old chapel, locked and forgotten for years. The air inside was thick, smelling of damp stone and extinguished candles. Adrian turned on his flashlight, and its beam revealed fragments of an angel painted on the ceiling, faceless, dim, a mutilated memory of something divine. The beauty, though buried, still breathed beneath the dust. He brushed his fingers over the cracked plaster, and the powder clung to his skin as if time itself recognized him. And then she appeared, soundless, sudden, inevitable. Isabella Conti stepped into the chapel, wrapped in a dark overcoat, her silhouette framed by the arched doorway. Her eyes were sharp, guarded, but weary from carrying the weight of control. "You've just walked into mafia territory," she said, her voice low and rough. "What exactly are you here to find, Father?" He turned slowly to face her, unafraid. "I'm no longer a priest," he said quietly. "I came to save what time has destroyed." The silence that followed stretched until it felt sacred. Even the cold seemed to pause. Isabella studied him, and something in her faltered. Just for a moment, a flicker of humanity slipping through the armor. His answer wasn't ordinary. There was faith in his tone, but not religion. Courage, but without pride. It was a voice she hadn't heard in years. Adrian didn't defend himself with explanations. He simply looked around and murmured, "These walls hold more than faith." Isabella folded her arms. Faith died here a long time ago. For the first time, the sound of her own voice made her shiver. He didn't argue, only smiled, a quiet, wordless prayer that seemed to say not every ruin is the end. She let him stay until morning. Perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of something she didn't want to name. The man seemed too out of place to be a threat. He studied the paintings with reverence, touched the cracks as if tending to old wounds. Isabella remained near the door, watching him but unable to leave. Every movement he made was simple, yet somehow it stirred something she thought had died with her sister. Outside, the snow kept falling, and the chapel seemed to breathe a new kind of silence, not the silence of mourning, but of expectation. Adrian brushed the dust from the faceless angel, and the beam of his lantern caught traces of ancient gold, flickering for a heartbeat before fading again, as if time itself were testing his resolve. Isabella watched him, and for the first time in years, her mind wasn't on business, power, or control. It lingered instead on the strange sight of someone who still believed in something. Rome slept, but the mansion was awake. Fate, patient and deliberate, had chosen this night to make two paths cross that were never meant to meet. Isabella Conti, the woman who had erased Christmas, and Adrian Leone, the man who restored what time had destroyed. Two opposites caught within the same frame. She, the portrait of what love had killed. He, the echo of what faith had survived. As the clock marked the slow hours of dawn, an invisible thread began to form between them. It wasn't desire nor pity, it was something deeper, quieter. The kind of connection heaven watches closely before deciding whether to bless or condemn. Because that night fate had made its choice, and neither of them would walk away untouched. The night stretched over Rome like a dark veil, and inside the Conti mansion, time stood still. Snow kept falling outside, covering the gardens as if trying to erase old footprints. In the chapel, the soft glow of Adrian's lantern painted shadows on cracked walls, revealing fragments of a past that refused to die. Isabella stood at a distance, her body composed, her gaze uncertain. There was something unsettling about that man, not the kind of danger she knew so well, but a calm that disarmed her without effort. Adrian continued his work as though unaware he was being watched by one of the most feared women in Italy. The tip of his brush moved across the wall with the precision of someone who understood that even faith ages. Isabella crossed her arms in silence, trying to resist the urge to ask who he really was. The ex-priest wasn't only restoring the fresco, he was changing the air around it. Each movement carried a faint sense of redemption, and she hated the way it made her feel. For a brief moment, their eyes met. It happened quickly, almost by accident. Yet something shifted in the air, as if the chapel itself had remembered how to breathe. Isabella looked away, masking her reaction with a quiet cough, but her heartbeat faltered. Adrian noticed, and even without words he understood. Her pain didn't need to be spoken. It lived in every command that sounded more like defense than authority. He set the brush down on the edge of the scaffold and leaned closer to the painting, studying the outline of the faceless angel. "There's something beneath this layer," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Isabella frowned, her tone clipped. "Everything of value was taken long ago. Don't waste your time." Adrian's smile was faint, not mocking, but gentle. "Time's never wasted when you're trying to recover what's been forgotten." She didn't reply. She just stood there in silence, as if his words had touched a place she'd buried too deep to defend. With every passing minute, the tension between them seemed to change shape. It was no longer hostility, but curiosity. Isabella stepped closer, her heels echoing softly against the stone floor. She stopped beside him, studying the faded angel, and asked, her voice laced with quiet exhaustion, "Why do you keep trying to fix what time has destroyed?" Adrian turned toward her, his gaze calm yet deep. "Because some things aren't destroyed," he said. "They're just waiting to be seen again." She had no answer. For the first time in years, someone spoke to her without fear. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was almost a refuge. Isabella took a slow breath, trying to hide the faint tremor in her hands. Adrian noticed, but pretended not to. He turned back to the fresco, gently wiping away more dust, and the gesture looked less like work and more like prayer. The only sound left was the soft patter of snow against the window panes. For a fleeting moment, Isabella wished time would stop there, between the scent of dust and wet paint. But reason quickly pulled her back. "You'll finish tomorrow," she said, her tone steady, practiced. Adrian nodded once. "Tomorrow, then." The words hung in the air, part promise, part farewell. When she left, the corridor felt colder. Isabella walked slowly, her thoughts spiraling. His presence had left a mark, unsettling yet alive. Deep down she feared what this stranger might awaken. Still, somewhere inside her, a quiet voice, perhaps Sophia's, perhaps just memory, whispered that destiny never knocks at the wrong time. Back in the chapel, Adrian remained alone. His brush rested, yet he couldn't bring himself to leave. He could feel that this woman carried more than grief. She carried a secret the years had tried to bury with the walls. He looked up at the angel again, the missing face now a perfect metaphor. Sometimes what's absent from a painting is the same thing missing from a life, the face of the one who was forgotten. The wind slipped through the cracks of the window, carrying with it the faint toll of city bells. Adrian closed his eyes, and for the first time since leaving the priesthood, he felt he was exactly where he was meant to be, not by chance, but by purpose. As the cold seeped through the glass, the Cornty mansion, long accustomed to silence, began to hear something it hadn't in years, the sound of destiny drawing near. Because that night, between a woman who had learned to kill love and a man who still believed it could be restored, something ancient awoke. It wasn't faith. It wasn't desire. It was the beginning of a story neither of them would ever be able to forget. By dawn, the first light crept through the chapel's stained glass windows, casting pale beams across the dusty floor, illuminating the traces of Adrian's work. He was still there, standing before the half-restored angel. The missing face seemed to speak to him, asking for something beyond art, perhaps redemption. In the doorway, Isabella appeared wrapped in a dark wool coat, silent, watching. For a moment the morning light caught in her hair, and Adrian thought he had never seen anyone look so distant, and yet so close, all at once. She walked to the center of the chapel, her heels echoing like heartbeats down an empty corridor. "You don't sleep?" she asked, her voice rough, as if unaccustomed to the sound of her own curiosity. Adrian smiled without turning around. "I've slept too much in the wrong places." His words gave him away. He was speaking from another life, another guilt. Isabella moved closer, trying to understand who this man was, someone who could speak with such calm, even inside the house of a mafia. The cold slipped through the windows, but there was something warmer in the air. Adrian looked at her, and his gaze carried neither fear nor reverence, only understanding. It was the kind of look that saw through the walls she'd spent a lifetime building. "These walls hold more than faith," he said softly, almost a prayer. Isabella drew in a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the fresco. Faith died here a long time ago. The silence that followed was heavy, but not cruel, a silence that listened. Adrian's eyes moved to a golden star painted high on the ceiling. "Then maybe it's time to wake it up," he said. Isabella looked at him in disbelief, yet part of her wanted to believe. There was something different about him, a quiet strength that needed no weapons, no threats. He carried in his hands the same gift she had long lost, the gift of healing, without asking for anything in return. As he spoke, Isabella felt something shift inside her, not the marble beneath her feet, but the ground within her that kept everything standing. No one had spoken to her like that in years, without fear, without flattery, without an agenda. Adrian was an anomaly in the world she'd built, a beautiful mistake, a different kind of danger. She walked toward the altar and rested her hands on the cold stone. "Do you really believe something broken can be restored?" she asked. Adrian lifted his gaze to her, his voice steady, filled with conviction rather than faith. "Yes, I believe nothing is ever truly lost. Sometimes what we call ruin is just the form time chooses to teach us." Isabella turned away, hiding the impact behind indifference. "Pretty words don't change what's been destroyed." "No," he said quietly, "but they help you understand why you're still looking at it." The words hit him too, as if they spoke of both their wounds. Isabella turned back to the fresco and, without realizing, brushed her fingers against the wall. Dust clung to her skin, and she quickly wiped it away, as if the gesture were too intimate to admit. "I don't want to remember," she whispered. "But remembering is the first step to forgiveness," he replied. Her eyes hardened. "I don't believe in forgiveness. Maybe that's why you don't sleep," he said. The answer struck her like a sudden truth. She took a step back, and the light from the stained glass crossed her face like a revelation. For a brief moment, Isabella wasn't the mafia boss. She was a woman tired of carrying her own punishment. "You talk as if you know me. I know pain," Adrian said. "It speaks the same language on every face." Isabella fell silent. She didn't know whether to hate him or admire him. Something new and uneasy grew inside her, the feeling of being seen, of being understood, of not being in control. With every word, he dismantled the defenses the world had taken years to build. And no matter how hard she tried, she could no longer pretend she was untouched by it. He went back to work, picking up the brush once more. Sunlight began to spread through the chapel, touching the old colors with an almost sacred glow. Isabella stood in silence, her eyes following the slow, deliberate movements of his hands. There was something hypnotic about watching him restore what time had destroyed, as if each stroke brought back something she herself had lost long ago. When morning finally settled in, Isabella broke the silence. "Stay until you're finished." Adrian turned to her, a hint of surprise in his voice. "You think you can trust me?" She took a quiet breath. "No, but I want to see if time still has the courage to defy me." Then she left before he could answer. Adrian watched her walk away. Her presence had filled the chapel with a strange chill, but her absence, somehow, brought more light. He turned back to the fresco and brushed his fingers against the faceless angel. "Some wounds bleed again before they heal," he murmured. Outside, Isabella walked through the corridors in silence, unaware that by allowing him to stay, she had also let destiny in. The mansion, long asleep, seemed to breathe again. Each of her steps echoed differently now. And though Isabella tried to deny it, she knew that man had left a mark, not on the chapel, but on her. Adrian Leone was a different kind of man, and his difference would, sooner or later, change everything. By the time Isabella returned to the chapel, the sun was high. The floor was still dusted with the golden powder Adrian had raised while cleaning the frescoes. The morning light streamed through a cracked stained glass window, turning the suspended dust into floating sparks. For a moment, it felt as if time itself was breathing inside those walls. Adrian knelt before the wall, a brush between his fingers, completely absorbed. Isabella lingered by the doorway, saying nothing. There was something entrancing about the way he touched every inch of the old angel with such care. When he realized she was there, he didn't startle. He simply stood, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I found something," he said, pointing to a darkened corner of the fresco. Isabella stepped closer, her heart unsteady. Beneath a layer of soot, a hidden figure emerged, an angel holding a small glass sphere. "Was that part of the original painting?" she asked, trying to mask the sudden tension in her voice. Adrian nodded. "Yes, but it seems someone painted over it later, as if they wanted to hide something rather than reveal it." Isabella frowned, her gaze fixed on the sphere. There was something familiar about the image, a memory hovering just out of reach. "Perhaps we should remove it," she said coldly, taking a step back. "It's just debris from the past." Adrian looked at her, his tone calm, almost gentle. "Or maybe it's the past trying to speak to you." His words seemed to echo through the chapel, merging with the distant sound of church bells. Isabella turned away, struggling to steady her breath. "There's nothing here worth remembering," she said, though her voice trembled. Adrian moved closer, studying the faint outline of the angel. "Art often tells the truth we try to hide," he said softly. She crossed her arms, frustrated by his calmness. "You speak as if you know my story." He smiled, not with arrogance, but understanding. "I don't need to know it," he replied. "It's enough to listen to what your silence keeps trying to say. The words struck a place Isabella had avoided for years. The silence. The same silence that haunted her every night. She stepped back, trying to steady her breath. The painting. The man. The light. Everything around her seemed to conspire to bring back memories she'd buried too deep. Sophia. Her sister's image returned. Like a flame that refused to die. Delicate fingers hanging ornaments on the tree, that easy laugh, the faint scent of lavender. And then, the sound, the explosion, the red stain on the snow. Isabella shut her eyes tightly, fighting to drive the scene away. Adrian noticed. He said nothing, honoring the weight of the moment. He understood now this restoration wasn't just of paint and plaster. The woman before him carried a wound far older than the fresco itself. He approached quietly and set the brush on the altar. "May I keep working?" he asked softly. Isabella hesitated. "Do what you came to do," she murmured, her voice unsteady. Yet she didn't move. Something kept her there. Perhaps the secret hope that if the angel regained its face, the past might finally stop screaming. He resumed his work, and, little by little, the angel began to take form. The golden glow re-emerged beneath the centuries of dust, revealing what time had tried to erase. Without realizing it, Isabella stepped closer, drawn in by the transformation. When Adrian cleaned the small glass sphere in the angel's hands, a shimmer caught the light, and for a fleeting moment, she saw her own reflection in it. Distorted, fragmented, but unmistakably hers. "It's as if he's holding something," Adrian murmured, studying the detail. "Maybe a symbol, maybe a memory." Isabella swallowed hard. "Memories don't save anyone. Sometimes they save us from ourselves," he replied. The words hung between them, heavy with a truth neither dared to touch. The light shifted. Rays of sun poured through the cracked stained glass, falling directly across Isabella's face. The gold reflected in her eyes, and for an instant she seemed part of the painting itself. Adrian watched her, his heart tightening for reasons he couldn't name. This woman, cold, distant, untouchable, carried inside her something so broken it almost begged to be healed. Isabella took a step back, as if realizing what he saw. "Finish it," she said, her voice weaker than she intended. Adrian didn't answer. He brushed away the final layer of dust and then froze. Beneath the paint an old inscription appeared, written in faint Latin, "Quando a luz apagar, siga a saerla." When the light fades, follow the star, the world seemed to stop. Isabella turned pale, her breath caught in her throat. The words echoed inside her as if spoken from within. "Where did you find this?" she asked, trembling. Adrian pointed to the lower corner of the wall. It was hidden beneath the dark paint. She reached out, tracing the faded letters with her fingertips. "It was the last message she left me before she died." Adrian said nothing. He didn't need to ask who she was. He already knew. Isabella stepped back, her eyes glistening. "I never understood what it meant. I thought it was just a poetic phrase. But now—" Her voice broke. Adrian moved closer, though he didn't touch her. He simply stood beside her, close enough for her to feel she wasn't alone. And there, for the first time in years, the woman who had erased Christmas felt the weight of remorse and the fragile pull of wanting to feel again. The angel on the wall, the golden reflection, the words of her sister, all converged into one truth. Perhaps the past hadn't ended after all. Perhaps it had simply been waiting for the right moment to be heard. And when Isabella lifted her eyes to the fresco, she saw something she couldn't explain. The sphere in the angel's hands seemed to glow faintly, softly, as if the light within it were breathing. Adrian saw it too, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The house, which had known nothing but shadows for so long, seemed to awaken. The echo of the past had finally found its voice. The stained glass light trembled, pulsing like a living thing, casting shades of gold and grey across Isabella's face. The phrase on the wall, "When the light fades, follow the star," still echoed inside her. A call from a time she had pretended to forget. Adrian remained silent, sensing the holiness in the air, as if the past itself had taken form before them. Isabella ran her trembling fingers over the inscription. It was her last note, she whispered, barely audible. Sophia wrote this before she died. Adrian didn't answer. Her pain spoke more clearly than any word could. He watched the way her body tensed, how pride tried to hold its ground while her eyes betrayed her, letting vulnerability spill through the cracks. What did she mean by it? He asked gently, his voice lighting the space like a candle in a dark room. Isabella gave a short, hollow laugh. She always believed in signs, said God spoke through symbols. I told her God only spoke to fools. The silence that followed was colder than the marble beneath their feet. Adrian took a slow step forward. And now? He asked. Isabella drew a deep breath, her eyes still on the wall. Now I don't know which of us was the fool. The weight of her words hung between them, mingling with the faint sound of the wind outside. For the first time, she looked lost, and in that loss there was something achingly human. Adrian's voice softened, but there was strength in it. Guilt is a prison we build with our own hands, he said. And you've been locked inside yours for far too long. Isabella turned to him, and for an instant her gaze burned. You don't know what it's like to carry a name stained with blood, she said, her voice trembling with restrained fury. You don't know what it's like to wake up every day and hear an explosion inside your head. I killed Christmas. I killed her hope. And all that's left is this house, these ghosts, and the silence. Her voice cracked and she stepped back as if realizing she had revealed too much. Adrian didn't move. Her anger didn't frighten him. It was the kind of pain he understood too well. You didn't kill her, he said quietly. Pain does that. It convinces us we're to blame for things we couldn't control. Isabella shook her head in denial. I should have been there. She went alone because I refused to listen. Sophia believed Christmas could heal anything, and I laughed in her face. When I heard the explosion, it was already too late. The confession hung in the air, fragile and raw, breaking through the icy armor that had shielded her for so long. Adrian stepped a little closer, but stopped close enough to be present, far enough to let her breathe. Guilt won't bring her back, he said softly. But love. Love can still give meaning to what remains. Isabella turned away, her eyes glistening though no tears fell. Love? She repeated bitterly. Love is the reason for all this. Love is the poison that destroys everything it touches. No, Adrian said, his voice steady, calm, the kind of serenity that seemed to come from somewhere beyond himself. Love is the cure. It's fear that destroys. The words surprised even him, but he spoke them as if obeying something greater. Isabella stared at him, bewildered, and for a fleeting moment, something inside her cracked. I don't even know what I feel anymore, she whispered, her voice almost childlike. I don't know if I even want to feel. Outside, the rain began to fall again, thin, steady, sliding through the broken stained glass and tracing paths of light across the chapel floor. Adrian stepped toward the fresco, his fingers brushing over the unfinished face of the angel. She believed in the star, he said softly. Maybe because she knew you'd need it someday. Isabella stood still, unsure how to respond. Each word he spoke seemed to open a locked place within her, a space she hadn't dared to touch in years. The mansion seemed to listen. The rain echoed through the corridors, mingling with the faint creaks of the windows. Isabella took a slow step forward, her eyes fixed on the painting. Why do you care? She asked quietly. This isn't your story. Adrian kept his gaze on the wall. Every pain is a story that repeats itself, he said. And I've lived mine. She caught the weight in his tone, not pity, but understanding. You've lost someone? She asked, almost involuntarily. Adrian nodded. I lost my faith. And sometimes that hurts more than losing a person. Isabella said nothing. She understood, perhaps more deeply than she wanted to admit. Maybe she too had lost her faith, not in God, but in anything that could still be called light. The wind rose, and one of the candles went out. Isabella flinched, her pulse quickening. Adrian lifted his eyes to the wall. When the light fades, follow the star, he repeated softly. She closed her eyes, a shiver running through her. Her sister's words, the sound of the rain, his quiet presence, everything seemed to converge into a single moment. For an instant, time felt suspended. Isabella felt the old pain pulse, alive again, and the resistance she'd built over years began to break. The tears came, quietly, uncontrollably. Adrian stepped closer, saying nothing, simply allowing her to cry. It was a silence that didn't need comfort, only presence. When she finally caught her breath, she looked at him. "And if I can never forgive?" she asked. Adrian gave her a faint, sorrowful smile. "Then let forgiveness find you first." She lowered her head, trying to hide the tremor in her lips, but it was too late. Something within her had shifted. The wound she had spent years concealing now bled freely, and for the first time she seemed ready to let it heal. And as the rain washed the stained glass clean, the chapel, for the first time in years, felt pure again. The past still hurt, but it was no longer a prison. It was a memory. And memories, when accepted, begin to lose their power to wound. In that quiet moment, Isabella didn't know if she believed in redemption. But somehow, she knew the star Sophia spoke of still shone, not in the sky, but somewhere deep within her. Night fell slowly over Rome, tinting the sky with shades of lead and melancholy. In the chapel, the air still carried the scent of rain and fresh paint. Isabella sat on the wooden pew, head bowed, eyes fixed on the floor. The silence was different now, no longer the emptiness of before, but the stillness of someone finally beginning to listen to what she had spent a lifetime avoiding. Adrian approached quietly, his footsteps soft, careful not to break the fragile spell the night had cast. He knew this moment wasn't meant for questions, only presence. She lifted her face, her eyes still wet. "Do you know what's worse than losing someone?" she asked, her voice rough, weary. "It's surviving what you've done." Adrian stood before her, the candlelight carving shadows across both their faces. "There's no guilt stronger than the love that created it," he said gently. Isabella let out a short, humorless laugh. "Love is the reason I'm dead inside." He sat beside her, calm and patient. "Then maybe it's time to let it bring you back to life." For a second, she looked at him with anger, but there was something too broken inside her to sustain it. "You talk like everything is simple." "It's not," he replied. "But sometimes, what's simple frightens us more than what's difficult." Isabella drew in a shaky breath. The wind slipped through the broken window, making the candles flicker and throw trembling reflections across the walls, as if the chapel itself were listening. "I never told anyone what really happened that night," she said at last. Adrian stayed silent, his eyes on the cross above the altar. He didn't need to ask. She had already decided to speak. "Sophia wanted to see me," Isabella began, her voice low, fragile, as if she were reading a secret aloud for the first time. "She said she had a gift for me, a small golden box. She said it was a symbol of new beginnings." The words came slowly, in fragments between unsteady breaths. "But I didn't want it. I told her Christmas was a lie, that she lived in a world of fantasies. I sent her away. She left crying, and she never came back." The distant sound of church bells broke the quiet. Isabella's eyes drifted, unfocused. "Later, I heard the explosion. I ran outside. Her car was on fire. People were screaming. They said it was a fuel leak, but I knew. She was only there because I sent her alone." Her voice faltered to a whisper. Adrian closed his eyes, and for a moment even the wind seemed to fall still. "She died believing she could still forgive me. And I never opened the box she carried." The tears came again, freely this time. Adrian reached out, his hand brushing hers with care, a touch so gentle it felt almost sacred. It wasn't pity she felt in that gesture, but something she had forgotten existed. Tenderness. She didn't pull away. "I spent years trying to bury this guilt, with power, with fear, with silence. But silence only made the sound of the explosion louder inside me. Her voice trembled, and he answered softly, "I know. It wasn't sympathy. It was understanding." For a moment she buried her face in her hands. The mafia queen, the woman of steel, looked like a child lost in the rubble. "Do you know what I hate most?" she asked, not looking up. "That she died believing love could still change anything." Adrian's reply was quiet, certain. "Maybe she died proving that it could." Isabella lifted her head, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean? You're still here," he said, talking about her. "That's already change." She let out a sigh, the kind that carries years of unspoken weight. "And what if I don't deserve forgiveness?" she asked quietly. "No one does," Adrian replied. "We just learn how to receive it." Isabella didn't answer. For the first time, she didn't argue back. His words slipped through her defenses like light through cracked glass. "Do you really believe that?" she asked after a pause. "I believe that everything true finds its way back," he said softly. "Even the love we bury." Her eyes drifted toward the fresco. The restored angel seemed almost alive in the flicker of candlelight. The colors, once faded, now glowed with a gentle, human warmth. "She believed in the star," Isabella murmured. "Said that when the light went out, I'd know the way." Adrian studied her carefully. "Maybe the star wasn't in the sky, Isabella," he said. "Maybe it was you." A sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. "You talk like you know who I am. Maybe I know just enough to see who you could be." The words slipped from him before he could stop them. There was something more in his tone now, something that went beyond compassion. Isabella noticed, and the silence between them changed. The air grew dense, slow, as if time itself hesitated to move forward. She stood and walked to the altar, placing her hands on the cold marble. The candlelight shimmered in her eyes, and for the first time they didn't look hard, only tired. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" she asked. "A man who still believes in miracles. And I only believe in consequences." Adrian took a step closer, stopping just behind her. "And what if the miracle is this?" he said gently. "Being here. After everything." She didn't answer. They stayed like that, motionless, listening to the rain outside. The world slept, but inside the chapel, something was awakening. Isabella felt her heart beat in a way it hadn't for years, heavy, but alive. The confession had opened a door, and behind it there was more than guilt. There was life. Adrian noticed. He stepped closer, careful not to break the moment. "You don't have to keep punishing yourself to honor her memory," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes loving someone means letting love take a different path." Isabella closed her eyes. The tears returned, quiet, steady. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "No one ever does," he replied softly. "We just try. And trying. That's already a kind of faith." The wind swept through again, snuffing out half the candles. Isabella looked up and saw the faint glimmer of the golden star reflected on the wall. The same symbol from the painting, the same light she had buried with her sister. And in that moment, without realizing it, the woman who had once forbidden Christmas began to remember what it felt like to believe again. Morning came slowly, a pale light seeping through the broken stained glass. The air still smelled of rain, and the suspended dust danced in the beam of sunlight, as if time itself were being purified. Isabella hadn't slept. She had spent the night there, sitting before the altar, watching the restored angel like someone staring into a mirror that finally showed what she had tried to hide. Adrian knelt nearby, gathering his tools and wiping the traces of dried paint. The silence between them was calm now, filled with thoughts that didn't need to be spoken aloud. When he stood up, Adrian noticed something unusual behind the altar. A narrow gap hidden by a darkened wooden panel. He stepped closer, curiosity sharpening his focus, and ran his hand across the surface. The touch produced a hollow sound, as if something lay concealed behind it. "There's a space here," he murmured. Isabella turned at once, startled, as though the words had cracked open an old layer of memory. Adrian pressed against the panel carefully. Dust billowed into the air, and from within, a small golden box tumbled out, covered in ash. For a moment, neither of them moved. Isabella recognized it before it even touched the ground. Her entire body froze. "It can't be," she whispered, stepping forward, her voice breaking between disbelief and fear. Adrian knelt and lifted the box with care, placing it gently upon the altar. The gold, dulled by time, still caught the morning light. "Is this what she meant to give you?" he asked. Isabella nodded slowly. "It's the gift. The one she was carrying in the car when she died." Time seemed to bend inside the chapel. Isabella brushed her fingers over the lid, and the dust clung to her skin as if the past refused to let go. "I never knew what was inside," she said, her voice trembling. "The police returned the wreckage, but this was never found." Adrian watched her in silence, reverent. "Maybe it wasn't lost," he said quietly. "Maybe it was just waiting for the right moment to be found." Isabella hesitated, her hands trembling above the box. "What if I'm not ready?" she asked softly. Adrian took a slow step closer, his tone calm, certain. "Destiny doesn't ask if we are. It just arrives." She drew a deep breath and opened it slowly. The lid creaked, revealing a lining of worn velvet. In the center rested a small golden star, broken in half. Isabella covered her mouth, her eyes glistening. The memory came flooding back, mercilessly clear, Sophia laughing as she hung ornaments on the tree, the scent of cinnamon and firewood. Her gentle voice saying, "When the light fades, follow the star." A sob escaped Isabella's lips, and the tears fell freely. "She tried to give Christmas back to me," she whispered through the tears, part grief, part awe. "She tried to show me there was still something worth saving." Adrian watched her, his chest tightening. "And maybe she did," he said softly. "Even without being here." Isabella held the star in her trembling hands. "It's broken," she murmured, "but it still shines." The words left her lips like a confession, and Adrian answered with a sad, knowing smile. "Sometimes the things that break are the only ones that let the light through." She looked at him, and something in the silence between them shifted. There was no more distance, only the echo of something being reborn. The wind moved through the chapel, making the candles flicker. The gold of the star shimmered against the wall, casting its reflection over the face of the restored angel. Isabella traced the metal with her fingertips, and it felt warm, almost alive. "Why?" she asked, breathless. "Why does a man I barely know make me remember what it feels like to feel?" Adrian lowered his eyes, unable to answer. He didn't understand either. He only knew that somehow he had been guided there, not by coincidence, but by something that had always known the way. Isabella placed the star back inside the box and held it against her chest. She cried quietly, but it was no longer the cry of guilt. It was the cry of someone beginning to understand forgiveness. Adrian stepped closer, and this time she didn't step away. His presence didn't hurt. It brought peace. The rain had stopped, and the wind outside seemed to hum a soft hymn. Inside the chapel, time stood still. "She believed love could heal anything," Isabella whispered. "And I called her a fool." "Maybe her love was wiser than your fear," Adrian replied. She smiled through her tears. "And now?" "Now," he said gently, "you do what she asked. You follow the star." Isabella closed her eyes and held the box tightly. For a moment, the weight of the past seemed to dissolve. The sound of church bells carried through the city, and for the first time in years, she didn't hear them as mockery, but as blessing. The Christmas she had sworn to kill was breathing again inside her. Adrian stood in silence. The woman he had met, cold and distant, now seemed made of light and sorrow, a fragile balance that only love could sustain. He said nothing. He simply smiled, knowing that in some mysterious way he had fulfilled what destiny had brought him here to do. Isabella lifted her gaze, and when their eyes met, the distance between them vanished. The mansion, the power, the fear, none of it mattered anymore. Only that moment did. The broken star in her hands glowed faintly, and for the first time, Isabella Conte allowed herself to feel the one thing she had feared most: peace. And as light spread through the chapel, the Christmas she had erased began to awaken once more. Evening settled slowly over Rome, painting the sky in hues of copper and violet. Inside the chapel, the silence felt alive, the kind of silence that carries promises. Isabella still held the golden box, her fingers dusted with the shimmer of the broken star. Adrian stood nearby, watching her with quiet reverence, as if in the presence of something sacred. The air was thick, still, heavy with meaning. The pain that once filled the room had changed into something else, a gentle warmth, pulsing softly between them, needing no name. Isabella drew in a long breath, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. "It's strange," she said quietly. "For years I thought Christmas was a lie, but now it feels like it was just waiting for me to open that box." Adrian smiled, his voice tender. "Christmas isn't a date, it's a gesture. And you just made yours." The words sank deep, mingling with the memory of Sophia, and something lit up inside her. Isabella looked at him. Adrian's face was bathed in the light streaming through the windows, and for a fleeting moment, she saw what she had never wanted to see: hope. She tried to steady her voice. "You should leave, before I become who I used to be again." Adrian's gaze didn't waver. "Or maybe," he said, unwavering, "it's time to let who you used to be finally leave." The words moved through the air like a prayer. Isabella didn't look away. There was both fire and fear in her eyes, the fire of someone longing to feel, and the fear of someone who no longer remembers how. The space between them began to fade, even though neither of them moved. The distant sound of the bells returned, but this time it didn't sound mournful. It was as if the city itself were offering its blessing. Isabella took a hesitant step forward. "You speak as if you've known me for a long time," she said softly. "Maybe I just recognize what pain does to people," Adrian replied. "And maybe that's why I found you." She lowered her gaze, a faint smile escaping, almost a sigh. "Found, or sent?" Adrian gave a quiet laugh. "Maybe both." The wind stirred again, making the candles flicker and spreading the scent of wax through the air. Isabella moved closer. Her eyes, once cold, now carried a new light, the kind that belongs to someone learning how to see the world again. "And what if I told you I don't know what I feel anymore?" she asked. "Then I'd tell you not to run from it," he said gently. "Because what you feel now is what makes you alive." The space between them vanished. He reached out, hesitating for a breath, then touched her hand. The contact was light, but enough to shatter the ice that time had left between them. Isabella closed her eyes, like someone remembering how to breathe after years of holding her breath. "I'd forgotten what it's like. Not to be afraid," she whispered. Adrian answered only with silence, not the kind that judges, but the kind that listens. She opened her eyes and their gaze met. No words could capture what was happening in that moment. It was more than attraction, more than comfort. It was the meeting of two souls recognizing in each other both their wound and their healing. Adrian moved closer, and the golden light of dusk wrapped around them as the world seemed to fall still. Isabella lifted her hand to his face, slowly, as though touching something she feared might disappear. "You should hate me," she murmured. "Why?" "Because I'm everything you tried to leave behind." He smiled, softly, his voice a promise and a confession all at once. "Maybe that's why I'm here." Their breath mingled, and for a heartbeat, it felt as if the whole universe was holding its breath with them. The kiss came like a miracle, unannounced, unplanned, but real. It was slow, restrained, yet filled with everything they had both denied for so long. Outside, snow began to fall again, and the last light of the day turned to gold. Inside the chapel, the stars' reflection shimmered on the wall, shining brighter than ever. When they finally parted, Isabella rested her forehead against his, her eyes still closed. "It's been so long since I felt something good," she said, her voice trembling. Adrian took a quiet breath. "Now you do. And that's enough." She smiled, weak but sincere. "You don't know what you've started." "I don't need to," he replied. "I just want to be here while it lasts." The painted angel watched over them in silence. The restored colors, the golden star glowing on the altar, everything around them felt new. Isabella looked upward, and for the first time she felt she could give thanks, not to God, nor to fate, but to the simple chance to begin again. "Maybe that's what love really is," she said softly, "the courage to let go of what hurt. And keep believing." Adrian gently tightened his hand around hers, their eyes meeting once more. "And maybe," he said softly, "the real miracle is that you still believe, after everything." The sun slipped below the horizon, and dusk wrapped the chapel in a peace it hadn't known for years. Isabella closed her eyes, allowing herself to exist in that fragile moment. For the first time, love didn't feel like danger. It felt like shelter. And as Rome slept beneath its veil of snow, the heart of Isabella Conte, the woman who had once erased Christmas, began to glow again. Christmas morning arrived in silence over the city. Snow blanketed the rooftops like lace, and the timid sunlight filtered through the clouds, gilding the horizon. For the first time in many years, the Conti mansion no longer felt like a tomb. The windows, once sealed shut, now stood slightly open, letting in the cold air without fear. Down the corridors, the staff moved quietly, puzzled by the unexpected order they had received the night before. Light everything. No one asked why. They simply obeyed, because when the mistress of the house commanded the light to return to what had long been dead, the world itself had to make room for a miracle. Outside, hundreds of lights shimmered on the trees, balconies, and iron gates. Their colors danced across the marble walls, bringing warmth back to a place that had long fed on coldness. The servants exchanged glances, whispering and smiling, like children newly allowed to dream. Inside the chapel, Adrian stood watching the result of the night before. The restored fresco seemed alive beneath the morning sun. The angel, now complete, held the small golden star that caught the light and seemed impossibly to breathe. Isabella entered quietly, dressed in white. Her hair fell loose over her shoulders, her expression calm. She walked to the altar and gazed at the angel. For a moment she seemed part of the painting. Flesh and spirit joined in the same motion. "She always believed the light would return," she murmured. Adrian stepped closer, standing beside her. "And it did," he said gently. "Not in the sky, but in you." Isabella smiled, and the faint curve of her lips illuminated a face that had known only shadows for so long. She opened the golden box once more. The broken star still rested inside, untouched, yet somehow different. Lighter, less sorrowful. Isabella placed it at the center of the altar just below the angel's hands. "This is what she wanted," she said quietly. "For Christmas not to die with me." Adrian nodded, his eyes fixed on the scene before them. Christmas never dies where there's still love to remember it. The distant sound of bells drifted through the morning air. Isabella drew a long breath. "You know what's strange?" she asked, looking at him. "I thought I had forbidden Christmas. But it was only waiting for someone to remind me why it existed." Adrian smiled, and in that moment there was no sorrow left between them, only gratitude. "Light doesn't need permission to return," he said. "It only needs space." Isabella lifted her gaze toward the cracked, stained glass. Sunlight streamed through the opening, casting golden beams across the altar. The dust in the air glimmered like floating stars. The entire mansion, once consumed by silence, now seemed to breathe with her. Every candle, every lamp, every shimmer on the walls was the echo of life returning. Christmas had been reborn, not out of tradition, but out of redemption. She turned to Adrian and studied him in silence. There was a kind of peace in his eyes she had never seen before. "And now?" she asked quietly. "Now," he said, "you live, and learn not to run from what makes you feel." Isabella nodded slowly. "And you?" she asked. Adrian glanced at the angel, then back at her. "I follow what's left of my faith," he said softly, "even if, now, it bears your name." A faint smile crossed her lips, light, real, almost imperceptible. The woman who had once been a symbol of fear now seemed made of light, her regret transformed into love. Isabella stepped closer and placed her hand over his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving back what time had taken away." He squeezed her hand gently in return. Sometimes silence says more than any promise ever could. Outside, snow drifted slowly from the sky, and the faint laughter of children echoed through the courtyard. The Cornty mansion, once a monument to power and loneliness, now glowed beneath the lights Isabella had ordered to be lit. Every window was a redeemed memory, every flame a forgiveness accepted. She looked up at the sky and whispered, as if speaking to someone still listening, "Merry Christmas, Sophia," and the wind, soft, warm, brushed against her face like a kiss carried through time. Adrian stood beside her, and together they watched the lights shimmer across the snow. No words were needed. The woman who had erased Christmas now carried it within her, and love, once a wound and a fear, had finally become faith. The star above the altar glowed brightly, and for a moment the world seemed at peace. If this story touched you, leave a comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There are still many more tales of love, power, and redemption waiting to be told.